Washington, D.C., November 1971. The International Martial Arts Convention at the D.C. Armory. Friday evening, just after 7 o'clock. The massive hall is packed with over 3,000 martial artists, students, instructors, and spectators from across the United States and around the world. This is the biggest martial arts gathering on the East Coast, maybe one of the most significant in the country. Champions come here to compete. Legends come here to be seen. And today, one of those legends is about to make a claim that will create a moment no one in attendance will ever forget. Chuck Norris is in the building. He's 31 years old, at the peak of his competitive career, recently returning from filming in Rome. He's won multiple world championships. He's opened dozens of karate schools across the United States. He's trained celebrities, businessmen, politicians, military personnel. His reputation is massive. He's respected, admired, successful. His schools are profitable. His name carries weight in the martial arts community, and he knows it. He's built this reputation through years of hard work, countless hours of training, competition victories, and smart business decisions. Today, he's not competing. He's here as a keynote speaker, invited to share his experiences, his philosophy, his journey in martial arts. The organizers are paying him well for this appearance. His name on the promotional materials helped sell tickets, but there's someone else in the building too. Someone Chuck doesn't know is here. Someone who slipped in quietly during the preliminary demonstrations, found a seat without drawing attention, and settled in to observe. Bruce Lee. He arrived without an entourage, without announcement, without any of the fanfare that usually accompanies someone of his growing fame. He's sitting in the 7th row on the left side of the hall, an aisle seat that gives him a clear view of the platform but doesn't put him in the spotlight. He's wearing a simple black suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. His hair is neat, his posture relaxed but alert. He looks like any other serious martial artist in attendance, perhaps a school owner, perhaps an instructor. Few people have recognized him yet. Those who have are too respectful to make a scene, too aware that Bruce clearly came here for the art, not for attention. They simply nod in acknowledgement as they pass his row. Bruce nods back with a slight smile, a gesture that says thank you for your discretion. He's here as a student of the arts, not as a celebrity. He came because he respects the martial arts community, because he believes in supporting these gatherings, because there's always something to learn. Sitting next to him is Dan Inosanto, his closest student and training partner, who had mentioned the convention and suggested they attend. Dan can feel Bruce's focused attention, the way he watches everything, absorbs everything, always learning, always analyzing. The convention organizers introduced Chuck with enthusiasm, listing his achievements one by one, his tournament victories, his school franchises, his upcoming film projects, his military training credentials, his celebrity students. The list was impressive, genuinely so. The audience applauded, many of them standing. Chuck walked onto the platform wearing his traditional karate gi, pristine white, his black belt tied perfectly with the ends hanging at exactly the right length. His posture, confident and strong. He smiled broadly, waved to different sections of the audience, thanked everyone for the warm welcome. His stage presence was natural, comfortable. He'd done this before. Bruce clapped politely along with everyone else, genuinely appreciating the respect being shown to a fellow martial artist. The speech started well enough. Chuck's delivery was smooth, practiced. He talked about discipline, about dedication, about the importance of hard training and mental focus. He told stories about his early days studying Tang Soo Do in Korea while serving in the military, about the challenges of training in the cold, about the tough Korean instructors who showed no mercy. He described opening his first dojo, the challenges of building a business from nothing, the satisfaction of seeing students grow from white belts to black belts, from beginners to instructors themselves. The audience was engaged, nodding along, some taking notes. These were valuable insights from someone who had achieved so much. Bruce listened with interest, always eager to hear different perspectives on martial arts, different approaches to teaching and training. He appreciated Chuck's emphasis on hard work and persistence. These were universal truths in martial arts. But then something shifted. Chuck started talking about his recent experiences in Rome, about being invited to film with a major action star, about how martial arts was finally being recognized in cinema as more than just exotic choreography. His tone changed slightly, became more casual, more conversational. And then he mentioned Bruce Lee. "I knew Bruce Lee," Chuck said, his voice carrying easily through the microphone, amplified to fill every corner of the massive hall. "We trained together, we competed together, we became friends." Bruce's eyebrows raised slightly. He hadn't expected to be mentioned. He glanced at Dan, who looked equally surprised. The audience perked up at this. Everyone knew about the connection between Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee. In martial arts circles, their relationship was well documented. They had fought in tournaments, memorable matches that people still talked about. They had trained together at various schools and private sessions, and just months ago, news had spread that they had filmed together in Rome for a movie called Way of the Dragon, an incredible fight scene at the Colosseum that people were already calling one of the greatest martial arts sequences ever put on film. "Bruce is talented," Chuck continued, his tone taking on a quality that made Bruce's eyes narrow slightly. "No question about that. Very fast. Very dedicated. Probably one of the most dedicated martial artists I've ever met. But you know, when we first started training together, he didn't know much about real tournament fighting. He was mostly self-taught, working from books and whatever he could pick up here and there." Bruce's expression changed. The polite interest was replaced by something else. Not anger, but focused attention. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. That didn't sound quite right. Those who knew martial arts history, who had followed Bruce Lee's career, knew that he had trained under Ip Man, one of the greatest Wing Chun masters in Hong Kong. "I helped him understand the competitive side of martial arts," Chuck continued, warming to his subject, his gestures becoming more expansive. "The strategy, the timing, the footwork for point fighting." See, Bruce had all this theoretical knowledge, but he needed someone to show him how it actually worked in competition. A lot of what Bruce became known for, the speed, the angles, the economy of motion, he learned from our training sessions. I remember spending hours with him, showing him how to read an opponent, how to score points, how to control distance. The hall was getting quieter now. People were listening more carefully, but with a different quality of attention. Confusion, doubt. Bruce sat very still, his hands folded in his lap, his face unreadable. But those sitting near him could sense a shift in his energy. Dan noticed his breathing had changed, becoming more controlled, more deliberate. The way Bruce breathed when he was centering himself, preparing for something. "In fact," Chuck said, and here he paused for effect, his voice taking on a tone of casual authority. "A teacher sharing wisdom. Bruce Lee learned fighting from me. A lot of his technique, his approach to combat, came directly from what I taught him during our time together. The sidekick that everyone admires? We worked on that for weeks. The 1-inch punch? I helped him develop the mechanics. Even some of his philosophical approach to martial arts came from conversations we had during training. That's when it happened. Bruce Lee stood up. Not aggressively, not with anger, not with any sudden movement that would suggest confrontation. He simply rose from his seat in the 7th row, calm and composed, his movements fluid and controlled. The way water rises, the way smoke drifts upward. Natural, inevitable. The people around him froze. The woman sitting to his right gasped, her hand going to her mouth. The man in front of him turned, his eyes widening. Within seconds, a ripple of awareness spread through the audience like a wave. People nudging their neighbors, pointing, whispering. Within 10 seconds, 3,000 people realized that Bruce Lee was in the audience. And he was standing. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the silence of people holding their breath, but the silence of 3,000 people simultaneously forgetting how to breathe. Chuck stopped mid-sentence, his eyes scanning the audience to find the source of the disturbance. When he saw who it was, the color drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly. His hands gripped the podium. "Excuse me?" Bruce said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall despite not having a microphone. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was simply clear, controlled, perfectly projected, with decades of training in focus and breath control. Impossible to ignore. Every ear in the building was tuned to that voice. "May I speak?" Chuck stood at the podium, frozen, unable to respond for several seconds. The audience waited, every single person holding their breath now. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpeted floor. Chuck started, then stopped. His throat was dry. "Bruce, I didn't know you were here." "Clearly," Bruce said, and there was no hostility in his voice, no sarcasm, just a statement of fact, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He took a step into the aisle, still composed, still respectful, his movements drawing every eye in the building. "You've just told 3,000 people that I learned fighting from you. I think it's important that we clarify the truth, for their sake, if not for yours." The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't confrontation. This was something else. This was history happening in real time. This was a moment that would be told and retold for decades. Chuck's hands gripped the podium harder. His knuckles were white. "Bruce, I was just sharing my perspective on our training relationship. Your perspective," Bruce interrupted gently, not rudely but firmly, "is not the same as the truth. And in front of 3,000 martial artists who will take your words as fact and share them with their students, truth matters more than perspective." He took another step forward, moving into a position where more people could see him clearly. Dan remained seated but alert, ready if needed, though he knew Bruce could handle this. "When we first met, Chuck, do you remember what I was already teaching?" Chuck didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how to handle this situation, how to salvage his speech, his reputation, his dignity. "I had been teaching Wing Chun since 1959, Bruce continued, his voice still calm, still controlled, but carrying to every corner of the hall with perfect clarity. 12 years ago. I had opened my first school in Seattle when you were still in the military. I had taught James Lee in Oakland. I had already begun developing the concepts of what would become Jeet Kune Do, the formless form, the style of no style. When we began training together in 1967 or 1968, I was not learning tournament strategy from you. I was sharing with you the principles of actual combat effectiveness, the difference between scoring points and surviving a real encounter. Someone in the audience whispered, "Oh my God!" Others shushed them, not wanting to miss a single word. "You were a good student, Chuck," Bruce said, and there was no mockery in his voice, no attempt to humiliate, just honesty delivered with the same clarity as everything else he said. "You listened carefully. You took notes. I remember you had a notebook you brought to every session. You asked thoughtful questions. You were open to new ideas, willing to challenge what you'd been taught. That's admirable. That's the mark of a true martial artist. But student and teacher are not the same thing. And what you've just described to these 3,000 people is not what happened." Chuck's face was red now, whether from embarrassment or anger or both was impossible to tell. "We learned from each other," he tried, his voice catching slightly. "Did we?" Bruce asked, and the question hung in the air like a koan, a riddle that demanded honest contemplation. "Or did I teach, and you learn? There's a difference, and these 3,000 people deserve to know which one is true. They deserve to know if the techniques you teach in your schools, the principles you share with your students, came from your innovation or from mine. They deserve accurate lineage. That's fundamental to martial arts. Knowing where knowledge comes from." The hall was so quiet, you could hear the heating system, a low hum in the background. You could hear someone coughing nervously in the back row. You could hear the sound of 3,000 people trying to process what they were witnessing. Richard, the instructor from Philadelphia, who had witnessed their training sessions years ago, nodded slowly from the third row. He had seen exactly what Bruce was describing. He had watched Bruce teach Chuck, had seen the dynamic, had seen the notebook, the questions, the patient explanations. He knew Bruce was telling the truth. "I don't," Chuck started, but he couldn't finish. What could he say? What defense could he offer? The man he had just claimed to teach was standing in the audience, calmly, respectfully, but firmly setting the record straight. And everyone in this building knew who Bruce Lee was, knew his credentials, knew his reputation for absolute honesty. "I'm not here to embarrass you," Bruce said, his tone softening, a note of genuine compassion entering his voice. "But I am here to defend the truth. You're a skilled martial artist, Chuck. You've achieved great things. Your tournament record speaks for itself. Your schools are successful. Your students respect you. You don't need to claim credit for teaching me to validate yourself. Your accomplishments stand on their own merit." Chuck opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Words failed him. His entire speech, carefully prepared, was falling apart. But something else was happening too. Something he didn't expect. He was feeling relief. The burden of the lie, even though he'd only been telling it for a few minutes, was already heavy. "I think," Bruce said gently, like a teacher guiding a student toward the right answer, "you should continue your speech, but perhaps with more accuracy about our relationship. Perhaps you could tell these 3,000 people what you actually learned from our training, what it meant to you, how it changed your approach to martial arts. That would be valuable. That would be true. And truth, spoken with humility, is always more powerful than fiction spoken with pride." He sat back down, just like that. No dramatics, no grand gesture, no victory pose. He simply returned to his seat in the 7th row, folded his hands in his lap, and waited. His point made. His truth defended. His dignity and Chuck's both intact. The audience didn't know how to react. Do you applaud? Do you stay silent? Do you laugh? Do you cry? This was unprecedented. Nothing in anyone's experience prepared them for this moment. Someone started clapping, a single pair of hands in the middle section. Then another person joined, then another, then a whole section. Within seconds, the entire hall was applauding, the sound building like thunder, like a wave crashing on shore. Not for Chuck, for Bruce, for truth, for integrity, for having the courage to stand up and correct a falsehood without destroying the person who spoke it, for demonstrating that strength and kindness could coexist, for showing 3,000 martial artists what real mastery looked like. Chuck stood at the podium, his hands shaking slightly, his breathing uneven. The applause washed over him, and he understood it wasn't mockery. It was appreciation for what Bruce had just done, the way he had done it. Firm but kind, clear but compassionate. Chuck said into the microphone, his voice barely steady. I apologize to all of you, and to Bruce. He took a breath, gathering himself. Bruce is right. He was already a master when we met. I learned from him, not the other way around. Everything he said is true. I had a notebook. I asked questions. He taught me, patiently, generously, and I don't know why I said what I said. Pride, maybe, ego, wanting to seem more important than I am. But it wasn't true, and I'm sorry. The applause grew louder. Not mockery. Respect for admitting the truth. Respect for having the courage to correct himself in front of 3,000 people. Respect for choosing integrity over ego. Bruce nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, of forgiveness, of respect returned. The speech continued, but it was completely different now. Chuck spoke more humbly, more honestly. He talked about what he actually learned from Bruce, about the principle of interception, of meeting force with precision rather than strength, about the economy of motion, eliminating unnecessary movement, about adapting techniques from different styles, taking what's useful and discarding what's not, about the philosophy of being like water, formless, adaptable. He thanked Bruce publicly for his generosity in sharing knowledge, for his patience with questions. The speech that had started as self-aggrandizement became a testimonial, a tribute. When it ended, the applause was genuine, warm, appreciative, longer than the initial introduction had received. As people began to leave, many approached Bruce, thanking him for speaking up, for defending truth, for doing it with such class. He was gracious, humble, insisting that truth should always be defended, but with respect and dignity, never with cruelty. Chuck is a good martial artist, Bruce told several people. He made a mistake. He corrected it. That's what matters. Others approached Chuck, telling him how much they respected his willingness to admit he was wrong, how much courage that took. Some shared their own stories of letting ego get the better of them. Chuck eventually made his way to the 7th row, where Bruce was gathering his things. Dan stood nearby, respectful but protective. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. Chuck extended his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not destroying me up there. You could have." Bruce shook his hand. "Destroying you wouldn't have served anyone. The truth didn't need your destruction to be clear. Teaching you, again, hopefully will serve both of us." They both smiled. Not close friendship, but mutual respect. Dan Inosanto later said, "That was the most Bruce Lee thing I ever saw." He could have humiliated Chuck. Instead, He simply told the truth, gave Chuck a chance to correct himself, and when Chuck did, Bruce accepted it. That's mastery, not just of martial arts, but of character. The story spread through the martial arts community like wildfire. Instead of being about Chuck's lie, it became a story about how to correct someone with dignity, how to defend truth without destroying the person who distorted it. Richard wrote an article for Black Belt magazine titled "The Day Truth Stood Up." "We talk a lot about martial arts building character," he wrote. "On that day in Washington, D.C., we saw what that actually looks like. The 3,000 witnesses carried it with them for the rest of their lives, passing down the lesson. Truth matters, but how you defend it matters just as much." Years later, Chuck would often tell the story himself. "Bruce taught me twice," he would say. "Once in training, where he taught me about martial arts, and once in Washington, D.C., where he taught me about integrity." When Bruce died in 1973, Chuck was among those who mourned genuinely. He always told the story of Washington, D.C., making sure people knew Bruce was not just a great martial artist, but a great human being. The legacy of that day lives on, not in the lie that was told, but in the truth that stood up, the apology that followed, and the grace that allowed both men to walk away as better versions of themselves.